Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now today's host, Chris Lang.
In this culture of greater knowledge and supposed enlightenment, popular dating methods have produced obvious and unfortunate results. Divorces, single-parent homes, and sexually transmitted diseases litter the highways of modern life. Even those who reject the Bible would have to agree that our sex-crazed generation bought itself a ticket aboard a runaway train. Is it possible that old-fashioned principles could actually offer healthy dating solutions? Hello, I'm Chris Lang, and today's topic is dating above the hormones. We believe the Bible itself offers sound, old-fashioned principles that can help young adults learn to use their head in matters of the heart. I want to introduce the people in the studio with me today. Our special guest today, Jason Illian, is an author and speaker. His book, Undressed, is called, actually a very provocative title, Jason.
Well, thank you.
The Naked Truth About Sex and Dating is a fun but to-the-point read, a brotherly and sometimes in-your-grill approach to counseling both genders.
We can say sex here, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get it out in the open so we all feel comfortable here
Indeed,
to start with.
That's an important point. And Rick here might be a little uncomfortable mentioning it, but actually, now that you're married, Rick, you don't...
Now,
now
I feel
that you're
much more
married,
comfortable
it's
with the topic because I know
Group hug.
what's going on.
Group hug, buddy.
Thanks,
It's okay.
man.
So, also my co-host today, Rick Mann. Welcome, Rick.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, tell us about yourself, Jason, and some of the events leading up to your writing of this provocative book.
Right. Well, you know, I hate to admit it, but if I don't say it now, I know when you're going to call me out on it, that I was on The Bachelorette. And
we won't hold that against you.
Oh, I heard
Jason.
somebody laughing. I don't know which one you did.
That was one of the crew,
This must be broken or something. I don't know. But, you know, I was on ABC's The Bachelorette. And before that, I actually went into a relationship where I was engaged and it broke it off. And I wanted to write a book because I'd read all these relationship books, but I had never had somebody speak to me about how my faith interacted in this dating relationship. We often hear the sex talk in churches like, well, don't have sex. And that's the end of it. And I'm just like, what, that's it? Like, how am I supposed to do this? And they don't say, like, how do we date? And what did God design for that? And so through that whole relationship and then on The Bachelorette, you know, I basically said in front of 25 million that I'm saving sex for marriage. And you would have thought that they'd just put a serial killer on the show, right? I mean, they were just, everybody was frightened. And so, you know, I really felt that there was a need to discuss this and get it out in the open because we're all wrestling with these hormones and our hopes and desires. And what do we do with them?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, Jason, I mean, Hollywood movies would have us believe that romantic love is the answer to our human emptiness. Yeah. But you make an interesting statement in your book. You say romantic relationships don't complete you, they reveal you. Yeah. Explain what you meant by that.
Well, so many times we think it's the romantic love that we so desire, but this romantic love that we're looking for is actually built upon God's unconditional love. Mm-hmm. So it's God's unconditional sacrificial love is really the foundation that the romantic love is around. And we want to believe in this Jerry Maguire that love completes me. And you know, that sounds sexy and that sounds great, but it's just flat out wrong. And the reality is that love doesn't go out there and complete you. It reveals you. It opens up your soul. And when you do get married and when you do have that intimate conversation, you realize that you're really just bearing your soul. And that person that there's with you is not completing you, but just complementing you. And when you put it in that perspective, it gives that room because that romantic love is that hole that we all miss. And that unconditional love is that hole that we talk about. That's where God's love fits in our lives. And so until you have that unconditional sacrificial love, you can't really have a romantic love to build upon.
So what you're saying really is the context a person uses to go into dating without that foundation, their context is more selfishly motivated?
Yeah.
More about me, my needs, how can this person be the right one for me?
Yeah, and you know, I don't think we often intentionally make it selfish. It's just that we're always trying to say what's best for me. The fact that if you have to go into a relationship that thinking it's about you, then you don't understand love. Because love isn't about you. It involves you, but it's not about you. And so, I mean, the very gift of love that Christ gave us is that he poured into our lives. He came here and died for us. He was giving. And yet in our culture, it's all about, what can I get out of this? You know, what kind of family can I have? How good does this girl or guy look on my arm? It's a take mentality versus a give mentality.
You know, the framework for this conversation is talking about our faith. So we can't separate that from church.
Right.
You know, is there a role that the church needs to play in this whole aspect? And if so, what is it, or should it?
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about the church as in the body of believers, then yes, that has a role to play in terms of accountability and talking these things out, and openness and transparency. If we're talking about a building, the church, I think it's already playing too big a role. I mean, so many of us are going to our youth groups and our singles groups in our church because we think it's their job to find us a Friday night date. It is not the church's job to find you a date. The church's job is to help you walk closer to our Lord, to have a daily relationship with him. It's not to make sure you have a date to prom. It's not to make sure you look good in those jeans so all the guys want you. That's not what it's about. Yet so many times we use that as a draw, as come here and find, you know, the love of your life. Now, you may find him at church. That does happen. But if you don't find him at church, if that's how we're selling it and they don't find him, then really what they're saying is, well, maybe God's not really God anymore. And that's a dangerous place to put our Lord and Savior.
Well, if not the church, based on your counsel in this book, then what environments can help young adults to meet quality people in healthy places, whether physical places or online?
Yeah. I think too many times we're looking for the standard places, the same place that we can all meet, whether that's, you know, a bar or school or whatever. And what I like to tell people is you need to find your passion. You need to find out who you are first and follow that passion. That means if you want to write, start becoming a great writer. If you want to cook, learn how to become a great cook. I mean, one of my friends, he'd been single for a long time, and he realized he got tired of eating mac and cheese. So he's like, I'm taking a cooking class. Well, little did he know that in a cooking class, there are like 12, 13 women that sign up for every one guy.
Not bad. Not
Right?
bad.
Well, he picked the right hobby to get into, though.
Exactly. but he was really just following what was on his heart. It's like,
Right.
hey, I'm tired of doing this.
Right.
And another one of my friends that has always wanted to basically learn how to ride horses and do this stuff, he ran into somebody that he's dating now when he was out there doing it. But if you don't like horses, you're going to look really uncool on a horse trying to meet somebody bouncing up and down, right?
Right.
And so there's not a standard place. It depends on your passion. When you find that passion, that's your light. That's the light that God talks about, that passion for that, and that draws people to you. But that's different for everybody.
So you think that the idea that opposites attract and then they attack, it doesn't necessarily apply? From what I'm hearing you say, if you're pursuing your passions, you're kind of almost giving God an opportunity to introduce you to people that might share some of your interests.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, the person you marry could be somebody that has opposite interests, or they could have same interests. The key is the foundation. I mean, there's a difference, and this is a huge difference, so I'm glad you brought it up, between godly characteristics and personal qualities. We often base things on personal qualities. Does he have a great job? You know, is he athletic? Is he tall? Is he handsome? Those are personal qualities. Those things change over time. But things about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, those are godly characteristics. Those don't change. So it's the godly characteristic piece that brings you together. And those other things, those are flexible, and those change even through ages of life.
So what about for you, Rick? I mean, you and your wife share a lot of common interests. I mean, is that what...
Be careful
Well,
what
if I
you
had
say.
followed your advice, I probably would have met her on World of Warcraft online playing a game or something, right? But no, actually, I met her at church. And but the thing was that you know, that's what we like to do. We were planning social events for the young adult group, and we kind of met each other. So yeah, it's one of those things where I'm glad that the church was there. But on the other hand, I wasn't looking towards church to fill that need for me.
Right. You were looking there because you were leading. That was your passion. There was both of your passion was to be there to lead and to serve. And the reason you connected is because you were serving, not necessarily because it was a church.
Right.
It could have happened at a nonprofit event or a school.
Yeah, feeding the homeless or something. Yeah,
it
you
could
bet.
have been anything.
Yep.
It just happened to be a church in this time. And I think that's what people need to realize is it could happen at church, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
So two people connect in a healthy place. They start to go out. In your book, you talk about allowing things to happen instead of trying to make them happen.
Right.
Explain what you mean about that in the early stages of connecting with someone.
Yeah. Well, I think when you allow things to happen, it's really, allowing yourself to be who you are instead of always put your best foot forward. We're always trying to impress one another. Yet, you know, one of my best friends, he went out on a first date and he saw that his date was really nervous. So they were eating Italian food, which, by the way, you know, that's a great thing to first because you want it to be messy because that's natural. You know, they say don't do Italian, don't do wings. Do Italian, do wings because you want to see how it is, right?
Right.
How's she going to, is she going to attack the wings or is she going to take the wing up?
Right. I'll just have a salad.
Right. If they have salad at a wing joint.
Right.
So, you know, he could tell she was really nervous.
If she's vegetarian, what are you going to use to measure her by, though?
Right. Then
what are you going to use?
I didn't write that in the book.
Oh.
I'm confused.
See, I'm a little confused
Appendix.
now.
Right.
Yeah.
Note
Follow up.
Note to
Part number
self.
2.
But, you know, you want to make people comfortable.
Right.
And be your true self. And so, like, when my buddy, she turned around, what he did is he took some sauce and put it on sides of his face and on his nose. So when she turned back around, he's like, what, did I get some on my face? and she relaxed.
Yeah.
And that's the point, is
Right.
like, don't always try to force this and make this happen because it feels forced. And, you know, if you're comfortable in your own skin, people are naturally drawn to you because there's an inner sense of, I know who I am, and I know who I am is attached to the Lord because he knows the plans for my life.
It's nice.
Yeah, that's huge because, you know, one of my random dates in college, that doesn't sound right, but, you know.
You were going to call her by name, weren't you?
Yeah,
You're
well,
like, random?
Cindy?
Dang it, these things are wrong.
Yeah. I was completely relaxed. I was like, I didn't try to be anybody other than myself. And I think one of the good things about that is and I did that with my wife, was that I didn't have to then propagate that throughout the relationship. I didn't have to be Mr. Suave all the time. I didn't have to be, you know, the everything's got to be just right guy.
Right.
You know, I was laid back and I didn't have to fall back on that, you know, later on. It was just really natural.
Well, and from a guy's perspective, women are looking for emotional intimacy. They're looking for that sense of vulnerability and transparency. And if you can model that from day one as a guy that, you know, I'm not perfect, here's the areas I fall back on and I struggle with, then it builds a natural connection for the two of you. And it sounds like you did that with your wife, and that's what I did with my wife too, is I was just myself, and I said, you know, these are the mistakes I made, and this is who I am, and if you can accept that, then that's a good place to start.
You know, you talked about emotional vulnerability, and women seem particularly vulnerable to that in the early stages of dating. You use a term, emotional promiscuity, in your book that's kind of basically hitting guys between the eyes. What is your warning to guys about that?
Well, you know, we are in a Christian society that guys don't ask girls out on dates anymore. We have lost the skill of literally walking up to a girl and say, would you like to go out on a date Friday night? You know why? Because we're too afraid that if it doesn't work, then we have to cut it off. We're not the men that we need to be. So what we do as guys is let's hang out. So what we do, we hang out and steal these emotional moments without giving anything to the relationship. And that's emotional promiscuity. That's cheating. You're taking an emotional moment from her without putting anything to it. And so anytime you're going to have a relationship, whether it's friends or even a romantic one, you give something because they're giving something to you. You know, it's a reciprocal relationship. And, you know, women have to be careful. Guys do this in the real world, and they certainly do it online too.
That's powerful. Guys might try to argue with you in that area, though, and say, hey, I'm just trying to be friends.
Right.
That's a pretty fine balance, isn't it?
It is, definitely so.
Well, stay with us. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Welcome back to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. I'm here with Jason Illian, author of Undressed, The Naked Truth About Love, Sex, and Dating, or somewhere in that order.
No, that's right.
That's an interesting title, very provocative. I mean, we're about ready to jump into some of the more colorful topics in this book. I'm also here with Rick Mann. Welcome back, Rick.
Oh, yeah.
Now, given the culture we're living in, it's common to hear people talk about the merits of test driving premarital sex before
Try
marriage.
it before you buy it.
You know, I really would like to get your feedback on what the Bible has to say, the principles, and your personal journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, it's interesting because we have a culture that's so quickly to promote, like, hey, you need to test drive this. You know, you need to make sure that the sex good so that the marriage will be good. But the more we talk about that, the more the divorce rate continues to climb, the more, you know, dating couples continue to break down. And so it's just countercultural. I mean, it's working just the opposite of how they're telling us it should work. We're having more sex, so our relationships should be getting healthier, right? But they're not. We're having more sex, and our relationships in general are, evaporating. And so from a biblical perspective, God basically said the two became one. He's saying that in a biblical sense, that marriage is the right envelope. It is the right container in which to hold the sexual relationship. Sex is definitely like a fire. Fire can be a great thing. It can heat the room. It can light up the room and keep things warm. But you take that fire out of the fireplace and you stick it in the middle of the living room, it burns the house to the ground. It's the same thing with sex outside of marriage. You take that sex out of the relationship in which it was designed for, marriage, and you stick it in the middle of a dating relationship, it's going to burn your relationship to the ground.
Wow, that's powerful. It's a powerful metaphor. I'm also thinking about, the natural laws of sex. The idea that the two become one.
Right.
Every time that someone has sex premaritally, aren't they leaving a piece of themselves, a piece of their soul with someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're designed to have these permanent relationships, and we live in a society where they're becoming so temperate. They're becoming so temporal, where we have it and then we tear it apart. We have it and we tear it apart. So this glue that's meant to hold us together doesn't work anymore, because we just bounce off each other. We have these very temporary relationships. And God didn't design it like that. I mean, that's why we're all struggling, we're all searching, we're all looking, is because we're not seeing real permanent relationships where where they last. And that's sad that even our parents' generation now, that more than half of them are divorced.
Yeah.
So we don't have examples.
Right.
But if we go back to the biblical model, you see how it works and how it should.
The thing is that God also made us to be emotional creatures who crave that connection
Right.
with other people. And, when we were talking about, getting ready for the show, the advice that we give the 18-year-old, it might be a little different than how we might practically apply it when we get older. I'm 36 now.
But you look good.
Well, it's a good 36, right?
Right.
But, I think about the fact that, God made us with this need to connect.
Right.
And that's the struggle, because, what if you're in this relationship for a year and it's like, well, it just feels right.
Right.
Because you want to take that next step, but yet you're like, well, I have to wait till I get married, but we're not ready to get married yet either.
Right.
I mean, that's the struggle. That's where the rubber meets the road for a lot of young adults, because it's like, well, how do I practically apply what I know is good for me with what I'm really feeling?
Right.
And
Well,
they come in conflict with each other.
Let's just be honest and open here that God's principles are the same whether you're 18, 38, or 88. When he said that sex is meant to be inside of a marriage relationship, that doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 38. For some reason in this culture, we think that once you cross into the legalized adult age, then you're free to do whatever you want to do. Teen Cosmo says that, don't have sex. As soon as you turn 18 and read Cosmo, it says 50 ways to get your men in bed, right? That makes no sense.
Right.
It's not based on
So there's a
age.
dual kind of set of principles being applied in the culture we're living in.
Right. That's what the culture says, but God's principles are steadfast, they're strong, they're foundational. They don't change based on circumstance. And so when he says that sex is determined and is meant for marriage, he meant it, regardless of the age.
Okay, so I think most of our listeners today would probably agree, if they're Christian, that it's better to leave premarital sex until they get married.
Right.
One of the questions that gets asked, unfortunately, probably more than it should be, is how far is too far?
Right.
I mean, ultimately, basically most people think sexual intercourse is sex.
Right.
But what about all the other stuff in between?
Right.
You wrote about that.
Yeah, well, that's the question we're all asking. I mean, and if we're being honest, one of the first times that I was reading through the Bible, I was looking for the loophole, right? Like, I know it's in here somewhere,
right?
That they're going to give me that right on, the Thursday night on when the blue moon's coming up, then that's okay.
But you spent a lot of time in 1 Corinthians. This verse was powerfully applied in this context. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Right. And basically what I did in here, and, we can talk about more of the details in the book later, but we basically created a ladder saying that every rung up the ladder is a physical step that gets you closer to sex. So it's holding hands, it's hugging and cuddling, it's kissing, it's it's French kissing, which by the way should be called Hebrew kissing, right? Because I know they were doing this back in the time of Jesus. But we're going to give the French credit for it.
Why did the French get the credit?
God knows they need PR.
Okay.
So, basically what it is there are all these steps, and this leads up to a ladder. And the problem is it comes a point in this relationship where basically what we call a vertical limit, and it's the same thing as a mountain climbing term, is that when you climb over 24,000 feet on a mountain, what happens is your oxygen-deprived human brain starts to shut down. Well, guess what? It happens the same thing in a physical relationship. When you start getting to this point where clothes start coming off, and you start fondling one another, and you start having oral sex, your relationships starts to deteriorate.
And probably your spiritual conscience as well.
Absolutely.
You're having to kind of suppress it.
Right. And the thing is, it's just like, the oxygen being sucked away from your brain on a mountain. You don't know it.
Wow.
That's the worst part about it. You don't know. And so it starts to take this nosedive, and you're on this slippery slope. And, 99% of the time, although they're never going to show it in a Hollywood movie, you start having sex inside of a dating relationship, it's going to crash.
And
that's powerful.
That applies to everybody. We're not just talking about the high school advice or the the young collegiate advice.
Right.
This applies to all of us, right?
Right, absolutely.
Any age.
Yeah, and you actually see it crash a lot faster the older you get.
Well, and I would think that the older a person gets, they have one of two choices if they're still single or maybe divorced, like myself,
right,
and dating again after several years. It's this idea of you're either going to get more desperate to be back in a situation, physical intimacy. That's the really tricky thing the devil brings into our mind, that we would somehow believe that would complete us or make that God-shaped hole fill up. And so we either chase after that in a more desperate sense than ever as we get older, into our 30s, or we use all of the rain showers, as you used that metaphor in our prior show that we did together, that rain showers that help to bring us tighter and closer to the Lord in such a way that we're comfortable in our own skin and we're okay if we never get married again. Somehow there's this coming of age God brings us to, isn't there? That we have one of two directions to go, desperation or trust.
Right. And I think a lot of that just simply stems from the fact that most of us aren't used to trusting in the Lord even early in our lives. I mean, we take ourselves, and even whether it's sexual or personal or professional, a lot of times we just don't trust that God has our best interest in mind. And I often hear a lot of singles, especially divorced singles like yourself, saying, well, I may never get married again. You don't know that.
Right.
You don't know when God's best and His timing is coming for you.
Right.
And so let's not simply throw it all in a bucket and saying, well, since it's not happening now, it's not going to happen. God's delays are not God's denials.
Either that or they try to manipulate God's hand by using various online dating or whatever.
Right. And really what they're doing is they're manipulating themselves. They're trying to take the God approach to control their relationships. And love is not something that has to be controlled. It's something that God has for us. And, God doesn't show love or have love. He is love. I mean, it's the very basis of what He's done for us. So why would He not give that and pour that out into our lives?
Isn't this a fundamental truism that cuts to the heart of every human being?
Right.
That my needs can't take precedent over another human being's needs.
Right.
In a way, every time we choose to not engage in a physical encounter with a girlfriend or boyfriend, are we not saying, God, I trust you, that your ways are better than mine?
Right.
And in that way, you're actually showing respect for that other person, aren't you?
Yeah, and that person that you're sitting across the table sharing that wonderful souffle with, right? They're understanding that He doesn't just want me for my body. He wants me because He loves what I think about and what my hopes are and my dreams are and all that first. And then the sex is great when you get married because it's designed to be the accumulation of all that. It's not meant to replace any of those things. And we confuse sex and intimacy. We put sex in front and then maybe have intimacy later, when in fact God designed it to have the emotional and the spiritual and, and just that personal intimacy before the sex. And you can have that inside of a dating relationship.
Rick, you had a question?
No, I was just thinking, how would you counsel somebody that maybe has made a mistake and said, listen, I've been in a couple of relationships and I've gone too far and I want to kind of turn it around and maybe I'm feeling guilty. Is there any kind of advice that you can give to someone like that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because the greatest thing about our faith is it's a forgiving love. If we had to come to God being perfect, we were all done. You know, we're all going to burn up here. None of us are going to be saved. But God forgives us. He sent his only son in our stead to be a sacrifice for us. And how much more do we need this inside of our dating lives? I mean, if you'll start with the fact that you're an idiot when it comes to dating, we're all idiots. If we all start at that fact and then realize that we have to have God to pull us closer together inside of this dating relationship. And, you know, if you've made mistakes, and we all have in some way, shape, or form, you know, whether you admit them or not, we've all made some type of interpersonal dating mistake. And we take that to God, then he cleans, I mean, he wipes your slate clean, and you get to start fresh. And the person that you're going to share that relationship is going to see that God works in your life.
We have just 30 seconds left. People discouraged maybe that are listening, multiple dating, failure of relationships, but you say that can actually help strengthen their character, don't you?
Absolutely. You know, the little breaks in our heart that God uses to grow our heart, to make it bigger, to make it stronger. And it's like iron sharpens iron. Although it hurts at the time, although sparks fly, it makes the blade sharp, and it makes you more ready for battle. And, you know, I think I'm a better husband now because of the mistakes that I made, and God used those.
Thank you, Jason, for being with us on Hope on Fire. Rick, thank you. You know, the Hollywood distortions of true love need not fool a committed Christian. One of the greatest questions of life, what is real love, is answered forever by a self-sacrificing Savior who washed the dirty feet of his friends and then died for all of us. When we're grounded and centered with that reality, we will respect others no matter the cost. And as we become the right people, we can be confident that the right person and relationship is just right around the corner. Thank you for watching today. We hope you'll join us again next time.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.